You know, this past week in finance felt less like a boring market update and more like a binge-worthy drama series. Seriously, it had everything. Plot twists, old school banks in trouble, a famous tech CEO, and a new player completely shaking up global payments. And I'm not kidding. You could pitch this thing to Netflix. Our main characters, regional banks on shaky ground, Jack Dorsey's Block making some big moves, and a very ambitious SoFi quietly working in the background. So what we saw play out this week were two totally different stories running in parallel. In one lane, you've got the traditional regional banks hitting some serious turbulence. And in the other lane, you've got the fintechs, who aren't just weathering the storm, they're busy building entirely new highways for the world of finance. All right, let's kick things off with that first plot line, the regional banking hangover that just won't seem to go away. It's a story that shows you just how nervous the market still is and how one bank's little cough can give everyone else a full-blown cold. So the bank right at the center of all this drama was Zions Bank Corporation. And just to give you a sense of scale here, we're not talking about some small local bank. This is a century-old lender with about $90 billion in assets. So yeah, when they talk, the market definitely listens. Okay, so Zions came out and warned everyone that their profits were getting squeezed. The fancy term for this is thinning margins. But here's what it actually means in plain English. Their depositors are, rightly, demanding better interest rates on their savings. At the same time, potential borrowers are kind of hesitant to take on new loans. And the result? The bank's profit on every single dollar is shrinking. And look, this matters because when banks feel the squeeze, they get way more picky about who they lend to, which can make it tougher for small businesses or even for you to get a mortgage. And this is exactly how one bank's bad news spread like a virus. Let's just trace the steps, right? First, Zions puts out that warning. That immediately triggers investors, and it gives them this horrible flashback to the banking panic we saw in 2023. So what happens? They don't just sell Zion stock. They start dumping shares of other regional banks too, because they're afraid the whole system's got the same problem. So, the real takeaway here is that the fears that haunted regional banks last year, they are far from over. They've just been lying dormant, kind of waiting for another trigger, like the idea of interest rates staying high, to flare right back up. And this is important because these regional banks are the financial backbone for so many local communities. Their health is a pretty direct signal of our economy's underlying stability. Okay, so while the old guard was wobbling, the new guard was busy building. Let's shift gears to our second act and see how fintechs are literally constructing brand new financial plumbing right under our noses. And man, this next one has been a long time coming. Almost a decade after Jack Dorsey first called Bitcoin the future currency of the internet, his company, Block, finally used it to buy a cup of coffee. Yep, a small $4 latte paid for over Bitcoin's Lightning Network. Now, I know what you're thinking. A $4 coffee? Big deal, right? Well, actually, it's a huge symbolic milestone. This wasn't really about the caffeine. It was a proof of concept. For Block, this is a huge step in their vision for a payment system that completely bypasses the traditional credit card networks. You know, skipping that Visa and MasterCard toll booth. And that toll booth is a big deal. Creating a real alternative could one day mean way lower fees for small businesses and a pretty fundamental shift in who actually controls the rails of commerce. I love this analogy because it just perfectly captures difference in strategy here. You've got the big guys like PayPal and Stripe. They're like those reliable mass-market espresso machines that just work. Then you have what Block is doing with Lightning payments. That's more like an experimental cold brew setup in the corner. It's definitely not for everyone, yet, but it's brewing something with a totally different flavor. But hey, Block wasn't the only one building something cool this week. Let's bring in our other main fintech character, SoFi. While everyone was busy watching the banks and the Bitcoin coffee, SoFi quietly rolled out a really clever new feature, cross-border payments. So why is this such a big deal? Well, SoFi is going after the remittance corridor to Mexico. We're talking about a market where over $60 billion are sent home by workers in the US every single year. And traditionally, this has been a space with crazy high fees. This matters so much because those fees take money directly out of the pockets of families who really need it. A better system could mean billions of dollars stay with the people who actually earned it. And here is the really, really smart part. It's how SoFi is pulling this off. They are using crypto's rails, specifically Bitcoin's Lightning Network, but they're keeping it all completely under the hood. The The user never sees it, they never touch crypto, they get all the speed and low cost of this new tech without any of the price swings or complexity. They basically avoided the classic crypto headache. There's a quote that just perfectly sums this up. It says to imagine if Venmo met Revolut and they went backpacking through Latin America. That's the vibe of SoFi Pay. It's just a brilliant way to describe their ambition here, the ease of Venmo with the global power of Revolut. Okay, so let's bring all these different threads back together now, because the theme this week is crystal clear. While one part of the financial world is stuck dealing with old problems, another part is laser focused on building the future. So let's do a super quick recap of this week's drama. You had Zions, who reminded everyone that interest rates are still kind of the monster under the bed for regional banks. You had Block, who finally delivered on a decade-old promise, even if it was just for a latte. And then you had SoFi, which cleverly used crypto as plumbing to build a powerful new global payment tool. And all of this leaves us with a really interesting question looking forward. As this split continues, as the old guard wobbles and the new guard builds, who's ultimately positioned to thrive and who's going to be left out in the cold? It's a drama that is far from over.